In this video, I'm going to explore the extent to which games can experiment with aspects of meaning, status, power, and identity in comparison to more traditional forms of literature, and the ways in which they look towards a new culture. This essay will focus on Atlus's game Catherine Full Body and F. Scott Fitzgerald's Tender as the Night, as both texts address themes such as feelings of confusion regarding identity and morality in the context of a protagonist grappling with the strife within his relationships. I will focus initially on the experience of engagement with a character, specifically the ways in which playing as Catherine's protagonist, Vincent, and reading Tender as the Night's protagonist, Dr. Diver, facilitate different forms of involvement with the themes. I will then go on to compare the implications of the player experiencing Vincent's relationships with NPCs as their own to those of the reader possessing an inherent distance from the characters surrounding Dick Diver. Synthesizing these reflections, the essay will then turn towards a more general conclusion regarding ludological theories which contemplate the potential for a new culture. In Catherine Full Body, Atlus USA's 2019 remake of their 2011 puzzle and psychological adventure game, Catherine, the player controls the survival and decision-making of Vincent Brooks, an immature and directionless alcoholic who fears commitment and feels plagued by his girlfriend Catherine's wishes for him to contribute more to their deteriorating relationship. Similarly, the character arc of Dick Diver from Fitzgerald's Tender as the Night sees the development of emotionally unhealthy and irresponsible traits, evident in moments exhibiting the clear decline of his self-esteem, tact, and moral compass. He was in love with every pretty woman he saw now, their forms at a distance, their shadows on a wall, describes Dick's mood as he further abandons regard for his wife by considering another affair. He views women as nameless objects for the selfish purpose of recovering from the feeling that he had lost himself, the spear of his former charm blunted by the women he routinely disrespects. Readers of this book may, at these moments, develop a similar negative perception of Dick to that of those who play Catherine and witness Vincent, for example, physically assaulting Rin regarding her transgender identity in a cutscene, or considering the chaos-aligned text options in the gameplay at the Stray Sheep bar. Catherine sends a considerate text on night 3, despite feeling hurt by Vincent's avoidance. "Haven't you been at the Stray Sheep every night lately? I thought you had an upset stomach today." And he may opt to reply, "I'll do what I feel like. I don't need you on my back every second." Although this presents personal flaws through abrasive dialogue, some may perceive these chaotic text options as less inherent to Vincent's personality than his violence against Rin, since they're merely a choice for the player. However, critic Lindsay Joyce explains that the player's negotiations between the spatio-temporal elements of the narrative and those of the story are largely facilitated by drama management systems. These systems signal the player when to act as a character and when to reflect as a narrator. Player's authorial perspective of his text activity allows their relationship to Vincent to shift slightly from being him as a character to narrating him, having this all-knowing view of Vincent's most unsavory, conscious and underlying feelings. Thus, it may be argued that these are moments where both the protagonists are conveyed as flawed, and the audience has an opportunity to make judgments on them. But there are significant differences between these presentations due to aspects of their respective forms of media. Of course, there are many factors in play here, such as the audio-visual element of gameplay not found in the experience of simply reading, which might make Vincent's instances of violence more shocking than Dick's to some audiences. But this section will focus on the immersion of interactivity. Jesper Jewell claims that complicity is effective because it creates a new kind of mirroring between the player and the protagonist by letting them share an unpleasant feeling of responsibility, summarizing a key way in which this interaction with Vincent differs from the reading of Dick Diver. What is the effect of this complicity through personal identification in playable characters? Might a player prejudiced against trans identities engage with and reflect more deeply upon these issues after experiencing both Vincent's violence against Rin and resulting guilt, perhaps allowing video games to point towards a new culture of empathy towards perceived otherness? There's certainly also a case to be made that to read Tender as the Night is to participate in the evocation of sympathy for Dick Diver, and to engage in the concomitant hostility towards that which has destroyed him. The reader becomes privy to an insider view of Dick raging with humiliation as his dignity further deteriorates during a drunken brawl, and they may even glimpse the aforementioned complicity in his savage triumph following the violence. It could be argued that the sharing of the reader in these emotionally intense responses facilitates a similar level of reflection. However, the reader of Tender as the Night may escape through focalization to Rosemary's more grounded view of Dick. Regardless of the player's view of Vincent, the nature of a single playable character RPG never affords them this retreat from identifying with his perspective. When the player succeeds, the protagonist succeeds. Both Vincent Brooks and Dick Diver, as characters, always have an affair, engage in violence, and attempt to evade their woes with copious drinking in every read or playthrough. But in Catherine Fullbody, there is a potentially discomforting added element of personalization and therefore active participation, which persists throughout. Moreover, in terms of the representations of the protagonist's alcoholism, Catherine Fullbody offers an alternative presentation to Fitzgerald's more straightforward depiction of Dick descending gradually into destructive behaviours as a result of his drinking. For example, in an altercation with the villa's cook, the author presents a synecdochal image of Dick's waning power. Because of an obstruction, Nicole could see only Dick's head and his hand holding one of his heavy canes, characterizing him by an aggression which comes not from an inherent personal strength, but rather a defensive tendency to weaponize anything that may be available to him. He treats the activity of drinking in a similar way, deflecting with, "The old girl has been polishing off the vintage wines," when criticized by the cook for his own frequent intoxication. Alternatively, by placing the player in the position of Vincent as a character themselves, Atlus not only presents his frequent alcohol consumption at the Stray Sheep as an inherent aspect of his identity, in terms of the NPCs in his social circle all sharing this habit, their absence from the Stray Sheep eerily indicating mishaps within their circumstances, as well as the inclusion of alcohol-themed elements of the visual display, but they also portray drinking as incentivized within the gameplay. Sebastian Domsch explains the concept of gameplay rationality as this: presupposing that the player's desire is to succeed at the goal set by the game, her decision should be based on how well they support the achievement of this goal. It is established to the player that becoming more intoxicated, as represented by the number of bottles filled in on the heads-up display, positively correlates with their climbing speed in the nightmare gameplay that night. Additionally, the game offers a collectible aspect by displaying new alcohol-related trivia on a dialogue screen for every individual glass consumed, as well as making an achievement entitled Cocktail Connoisseur available for unlocking all of the trivia. As stated by critic Judith Vary, a virtual economy of valuable items can develop, explaining that various collectible elements of gameplay can incentivize grinding for a sense of accomplishment. In this way, the interactive nature of Vincent's drinking allows the theme of personal identity as an alcoholic to become subject to experimentation. It could be argued that it appears that these more light-hearted representations of simulated drinking could normalize a cultural perception of heavy drinking as desirable in comparison to Dick Diver's bleak downfall. However, through the circumstances surrounding this activity, such as his blackouts enabling the succubus character Catherine, a stereotypically attractive seductress who represents infidelity and self-serving desire to manipulate him, the motif of drinking is ultimately presented as a symbol of Vincent's poor judgment and chaos-aligned traits. By developing a digital environment for the player to act as a heavy drinker, they may reflect on their own chaotic behavior and even their levels of empathy towards those who suffer with addiction. Furthering the idea that different forms of media hold the potential to create separate cultural impacts regarding the themes associated with the text, critic Christine Tomlinson notes the following about the pursuit of romantic plotlines in games. Their character's position in the story is no longer the only concern, but also the character's emotional well-being and influence on others. This essay has addressed the implications of player experience as the protagonist in Catherine Fullbody, but this close involvement with characters in games is not limited solely to those that are playable, and navigating such relationships in Catherine may, more so than with characters of a book who are read without simulated interaction, enable personal reflection upon relationship portrayals in media, society's treatment of women, and even unhealthy interpersonal interactions the player may have experienced themselves. The plot revolves around Vincent's destabilized relationship with Catherine, spelt with a K, but an aspect of the game's story world which significantly represents his personal challenges and turmoil is the inclusion of two other NPCs with whom he can interact as love interests, Catherine with a C and Catherine with a Q, shortened to Rin. Plotlines pertaining to various romanceable NPCs in games have often been subject to discussion by players online and in person, evidenced by a study referenced in Tomlinson's article. She comments that, in cases where a video game, discussed by the interviewees, provides a romantic option, the focus shifts quickly to who the players would choose. It could be supposed that games with more options for romantic paths, such as games from Nintendo's Fire Emblem series and even Atlus's Persona series, create a foundation for deeper immersion due to the world-building nature of NPC interactivity. However, the interconnectedness of sexual, romantic, and otherwise complex interpersonal themes with the plot of Catherine, despite there only being 3 options, provides a unique opportunity for players to engage with relationship themes in this game. While players of Persona or Fire Emblem games may, if they wish, neglect to pay much attention to, or even engage at all with these features, Catherine's narrative places consistent emphasis on presenting Vincent with reasons to become invested in the emotional well-being of the 3 Catherines and pursue any of the multiple endings with each of them. As mentioned, the goals of the player are aligned with the goals of the protagonist, and the clear goal of navigating the climbing puzzles to survive the nightmares may, in this way, quickly become a priority for players. Many reviews support this. This immersion in Vincent's endeavour to survive his predicament contributes to the player's interpersonal connection with the 3 main NPCs, as 1 level per nightmare includes the appearance of a heavily distorted and gruesome version of a character in Vincent's life, inviting the player to experience the fear represented by their hostility in his subconscious, as well as to empathise with the respective difficulties conveyed. The 2 original Catherines appear as bosses twice each, perhaps one of the most symbolic of Vincent's feelings surrounding his relationship being the Fist of Grudge, Catherine's, with a K, disembodied hand and voice, which cinematographically mirrors the zoomed-in view of her hand from a previous cutscene. Since her portrayal in cutscenes and other appearances outside of Vincent's nightmares, such as this, is comparatively considerate and rational, this experience provides the player, at an early stage of the narrative, with a highly immersive insight into his true apprehensions despite her reserved personality, implying a projected sense of threat. This enhances the player's understanding of their relationship with Catherine as the insecure Vincent. These game mechanics and features may provide a new way for the exploration of these themes to be more accessible than perhaps portrayals of Dick Diver similarly antagonizing Nicole within Tender as the Night's more traditional format, and Fitzgerald's representation of interpersonal discord and toxic masculinity generally. Ian Bogost explains in Persuasive Games that, unlike verbal discourse, which relies on deeply ingrained metaphors that most people take for granted, video games deploy more abstract representations about the way the world does or should function. This is not to say that Tender as the Night does not also navigate these notions of identity and connection, the complex and insidious destruction of romantic relationships through the lens of the protagonist's experience of his own shortfallings and incompatibility with Nicole, presented throughout. This includes insight into the lack of stability seen in rapid shifts in Dick's attitude towards the relationship. He moves to feeling it necessary that Nicole cure herself, his insecurity reflecting in resurgences of impatience regarding Nicole's schizophrenia, revealing that his desire to be the greatest psychologist that ever lived had been an entirely selfish ambition, from initially feeling that she had embodied all the excitement of the world. Furthermore, Catherine's protagonist becomes defined by a desperate scramble to resolve the fallout of his infidelity for fear of potential punishment by the two women, as they are considerably more assertive than him, which is evidenced by the boss levels, the motif of the women's wrath rumour due to multiple unfaithful men from the bar sharing the nightmare, and his lack of control over events. Some reviewers have felt frustrated over finding their direction of the character's behaviour to be fairly insignificant, as his immature lack of initiative even remains throughout some of the endings. This theme of insecurity in men feeling that they lack the traditional masculinity expected of them in society is of course also present in Tender as the Night, as literary critic Fetterly observes that without work of his own or economic independence, Dick's situation resembles that of a wife. He signs off a letter to Maria Wallace as Nicole, despite their marriage already beginning to break down, but Nicole, on the other hand, is always Nicole, rarely, if ever, Mrs. Diver. As he appears more affected by his perceived insufficiency as a man over the course of the novel, he begins to overcompensate by angering frequently over his jealousy regarding Rosemary's other affairs, and the flow of the narrative discourse is occasionally fragmented by arbitrary insertions of the phrase, "Do you mind if I pull down the curtain?" This is a question from Rosemary's offhanded, reported dialogue from one of the affairs, which becomes subject to Dick's fixation, potentially due to the gender-related element of his struggle with identity. This further facilitates the exploration of these societal norms through the depiction of a relationship in the format of a traditional literary text. It still conveys similar themes to those of Catherine mentioned in this section, while lacking the interactivity and other features of the game. In this way, it is clear that elements of such a format function differently than video games in presenting these ideas. Although many readers might experience significant emotional and narrative immersion through Fitzgerald's depictions of inner turmoil, and may, whether consciously or otherwise, employ the text as a tool to expand the scope of their engagement with matters such as general societal perceptions, this essay has aimed to demonstrate the innovative nature of the video game format in a literary context. Perhaps there are also certain drawbacks. Certain critics have noted that social expectations frequently shape video game content, leading to limits on artistic freedom for the sake of maximizing potential profit. And furthermore, reviewers have reported utilizing features of Catherine, such as the ability to skip cutscenes and autoplay nightmares, as they have felt it necessary. Does the use of these features parallel reading Tender as the Night and skipping the sections with Rosemary's point of view, or is the accessibility of customizing play an important factor in striving for a new culture of opportunities to navigate unfamiliar themes? Regardless, the global interest in Catherine, often for its deeply explorative and replayable story, can ultimately be perceived as a testament to its potential to occupy a cultural space similar to Tender as the Night. Atlus has successfully renewed the text discussions of masculine fragility, infidelity, and faltering senses of belonging and society in a form of literature which navigates them in a wholly different and more contemporary manner. Thank you.